What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Mets Weekly. Now, before we get into today's video, I want to remind everybody to make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on those post notifications to always know when notified when our live recording of the podcast hits Monday nights at 7 Eastern. Be sure to follow Mets Weekly on X and on TikTok for future off-season content. Be sure to follow all the co-hosts who are linked down in the description down below. With all that being said, let's begin. With the non-tender deadline hitting on November 21st, we've seen teams certify their 40-man rosters going into the Rule 5 draft. That always means there will be more talent added to free agency. And in today's video, we're going to talk about 3 non-tendered pitchers the Mets should target this offseason. We'll start off video with left-handed reliever formerly from the Tampa Bay Rays, and that is Colin Poach, the lefty. Last year threw in 37 1/3 innings pitched with a 3.86 ERA with 33 strikeouts. He's a two-pitch guy with the Mets' desperate need for a left-handed reliever. After his breakout year in 2023, where he posted a 2.3 ERA in over 60 2/3 innings pitched, over a strikeout per 9 at 61 strikeouts and a whip just above 1, Colin Poach would give you at least a left-handed option. Fastball velocity did go down 93 last year. Now it was sitting close to 91, which you don't like to see. And again, if the Rays are DFAing a guy, they're definitely a team that knows how to develop relievers. And if they're cutting bait, maybe isn't the greatest sign. But again, this is also for financial with the Tampa Bay Rays losing a stadium and not having a stadium right now because of Tropicana Field's destruction. They're in the most cost-cutting ways to make their financials as small as possible, being able to play their regular season games at George Steinbrenner Field in Tampa. And let's say, again, if Brooks Raley we do not expect is current free agent, and I think he would be better overall than Danny Young and Alex Young. So again, you're adding some depth in the bullpen, and you're able to send Danny Young back to Syracuse and have him sit down there ready to go if need be, even though he did show some strides this last year. You could never have enough bullpen arms as you're going to see. We've seen the Mets lefties go through that scrap beat of Jake Diekman, Alex Young, Danny Young, Tyler J. We've seen a bunch of lefties, and Colin Poach, again, isn't the greatest arm. Obviously, they've missed Brooks Raley all of last year, and with his uncertain future of coming off of Tommy John, we'll see if they bring him back and if he's even able to pitch. So Colin Poach would at least be a guy you can pencil in to add some more depth. If he takes a minor league deal, it'd be great. If he is your major league and he could be your only lefty in the bullpen, if you see that fit as having to have a lefty, because obviously we've said on this channel, we've seen teams like the Houston Astros win World Series with not having a lefty. It's not a major need for some, but I know for the traditional fan who would love that left-handed pitching, especially all the lefties we do face in the division, it's not a bad idea to have an extra lefty. And if, Danny Young continues to progress solidly, you have Colin Poach as kind of that secondary lefty in the bullpen, which would not be a terrible idea. Moving on to number 2, and he's probably the most surprising non-tender of all the guys that were non-tender, and that is Washington Nationals former closer Kyle Finnegan, the 33-year-old righty who was an all-star for the Washington Nationals in over 63 and 2 innings pitched, 60 strikeouts, a 3.68 ERA, also accumulating 38 saves with a whip at 1.34. You look at his pitch arsenal, he's got a fastball sitting around 97, throws it about 70% of the time. He has a split finger where he throws it 27% of the time, and he also has a slider. He throws around 85 miles an hour about 6% of the time. So kind of fastball splitter. We've seen a lot of him in division. It was a player that the Nationals should have traded at the trade deadline. There was a lot of rumors that he was going to be moved at the deadline, especially with the price of relievers. It would have been a very good idea for the Washington Nationals to make the trade, but they decided to hold him, and then they just non-tender him and lose him for nothing, which is not a great asset management. Why would this work? One, it's more velocity and more stuff, which we've seen the Mets with Ryan Stanek bring in guys who throw the ball hard. Finnegan is an arm that you can use in multiple ways. Obviously, with the Washington Nationals, he was their closer, but again, if he were to come to the Mets, obviously we have Edwin Diaz, it would be able to give Carlos Mendoza a little bit of luxury of say, hey, you have a guy who's gotten big outs in the ninth inning. Yes, it's been with the Washington Nationals. We haven't seen him in a high leverage pressure important games, but we have seen him, especially with relievers, it's different pitching in the ninth inning than it is to pitch in the 8th or 7th, which he could be a very quality setup man to get to the bridge to Edwin Diaz with him, Reed Garrett, Jose Budo. Let's see if they add a couple other guys. You could already see the adding to this bullpen, and he would be a very quality. Again, it shouldn't cost more than, I would say $6 to $7, $8 million a year to have a secondary closer, to have the ability, like I said, to utilize Edwin Diaz. Again, let's say it's the 8th inning and the Phillies at the top of their lineup. Instead of wasting and having to wait for Diaz in an 8th, you can utilize him because you have a confident guy who can be that secondary closer, like we've said on this channel multiple times, how important we would like to see the Mets have a guy to if you want to use Edwin Diaz in a big spot early in the game, to have a guy you could trust, and instead of it being, a Jake Diekman or an Adam Ottavino or Reed Garrett, who Reed Garrett was okay and definitely got better after the injury in the playoffs. But again, to have a guy who you can trust to go out and get outs in the ninth inning, who's done it in the major leagues before, not just, well, he's got good stuff, well, let's try it. This is a guy who's done it for multiple years. And we've seen the Mets also as well sign a lot of former Washington Nationals. A lot of these minor league deals they've added are all before or mostly former Washington Nationals. So again, this is another reliever, former Washington National, that David Stearns has seen a lot, obviously this past year, and the Mets have seen a lot playing in the division. So, and they would be a very interesting add. Again, it's surprising. Also, non-tender Tanner Rainey, which is another reliever that could have been on this list, who's another solid option that potentially can be adding the potential lower to mid-level leverage guys that the Mets can add to lengthen their pen. But Finnegan just having the ability of, one, having that secondary closer that we've talked about multiple times on this channel that we would like to see, so you can utilize one of the best relievers in baseball, Edwin Diaz, and not just have to use him in the ninth inning because we don't have anyone else we trust that can get the last 3 outs in the game. To be able to bring a guy like Finnegan in to be that, it gives the Mets more flexibility and it gives Carlos Mendoza more options to finish a game. Our final arm of the non-tendered class, and that being former Toronto Blue Jays closer, 31-year-old reliever Jordan Romano, a former All-Star in his career. He's a notorious two-pitch guy, fastball, slider, fastball sitting about 96, 97. He throws it about 48% of the time, and he's obviously a primary slider, throwing it 52% of the time. After a bad 2024, which again, it was an injury-prone year, only threw 13 2/3 innings in 15 appearances, posting a 6.59 ERA, struck out 13 batters, and also got 8 saves. After 2 electric seasons in 2022, where he posted 2.11 ERA, 36 saves in 64 innings, and then also in 2023, 2.9 ERA, 36 saves, posting 72 strikeouts in 59 innings pitched. He is a very interesting release for Toronto. It was a cost-cutting maneuver, because again, Toronto, in a bullpen that was horrific, they cut off their best reliever. Yes, again, he was injury-prone, but Jordan Romano, for a lot of his career, has been one of the top 10 closers in the game because it has a two-pitch guy. He never was the best, but he's always a very serviceable and really good closer. And the fact that the Blue Jays, whose bullpen was ranked as one of the worst in baseball, would give up their best reliever just because he made a little bit of money, I think he was making close to $8 million, is not a good look for Toronto, but again, could be to the Mets' benefit. Similar to Kyle Finnegan, this is a way more reliable ninth-inning option as a secondary closer or setup man to Edwin Diaz. To be able to add his quality of reliever to a thin overall free agent class. There's Tanner Scott, and then there's kind of a drop-off, and then you have a lot of quality high-leverage guys, so Carlos Estevez, I guess. You can make the argument that Jordan Romano for his career has been better than Carlos Estevez, so maybe you are pricing yourself up a little more, because I think, obviously, Scott is the best reliever. Then I would probably say it is Jordan Romano, then Carlos Estevez if you're looking for the closer type. But if he's looking for a bounce back, this should be a guy that David Stearns falls in love with. Fastball, slider, we've seen a lot of the relievers they've had are high-velocity fastballs and sliders. That is what Jordan Romano profiles as. It's a big help for Carlos Mendoza to have that ability, and especially with Jordan Romano, who we talked about with Kyle Finnegan. Jordan Romano has done it for longer and has been better in that time, in the high-pressure situations, in that ninth inning, in one of the most offensively potent divisions and playing in the American League East, and he's been one of the more reliable relievers in the game. And the fact that, again, this is just a straight cost-cutting maneuver from Toronto, the Mets could see an opportunity to say, hey, this could be either a 1+1 or maybe a 2-year deal for a guy. Romano probably looking for a high 1 AAV, potentially to bounce back, especially after the injury-riddled year he had last year. David Stearns is notorious for not spending on relievers. But again, to be able to have a guy like Jordan Romano, pair him with Edwin Diaz, and you have your middle relieving guys and Jose Budo and Reed Garrett, and then you can kind of, figure out if you're bringing back Ryan Stanek, or if you upgrade from Phil Maton, now you're starting to put a really good bullpen together. You get Danel Nunez back healthy. Now you're looking at a strength that the Mets can have in the bullpen if you were to bring in a Jordan Romano type as that, second elite high leverage arm that he can be. And now you're adding, and especially with Stearns adding those guys on the margins, on the 40-man roster that we've already seen, you're seeing a bullpen that can be developed and become a strength for this team. If David Stearns can add that kind of one more elite arm, then the trickle-down factor can make and lengthen this pen and make it one of the best overall in baseball. Those are the three that I think the Mets should definitely make some phone calls and make aggressive. Obviously, I just want to throw these other couple guys because they were other pitchers that were non-tendered that I don't see as a need to go out and get, but just to throw him out. Holby Milner was DFA'd by the Milwaukee Brewers. Tanner Rainey, like I mentioned earlier, with the Washington Nationals. And Brent Honeywell, who we saw with the Dodgers in the postseason, had go multiple innings, could be a swingman, and we've seen the Mets very active in swingman and kind of former starters adding to the pen. Those three guys shouldn't be targeted, just should mention them here because they were DFA'd and potentially could be targets down the line. So with all the non-tenders done, we know what free agency is going to be. Now, David Stearns, go do what you do best and continue to build this team to a championship level.